Hey, so listen, understanding and using a new language is not an experience where you look at everything under a microscope. If you are caught in the habit of trying to translate and analyze everything that you read and listen to in a new language, you're going to get in your own way. Hi everyone, and welcome to Lingua Carpa. I'm Carp, language tutor and teacher for over 12 years. Wow. Today, I want to help you stay out of your own way when you're learning a new language by understanding the target language in the target language, as opposed to translating everything when you're taking it in. Let's get started so you can understand the idea a little better. We'll go through 3 points today on understanding the target language in the target language. Before we can do that, we must briefly discuss the Centipede's Dilemma, a short poem by Catherine Craster from the 1800s. It illustrates beautifully the key concept behind our discussion today. Here's the poem. A centipede was happy, quite, until a toad in fun said, "Pray, which leg moves after which?" This raised her doubts to such a pitch, she fell exhausted in the ditch, not knowing how to run. Personally, I love Craster's poem for many reasons. I think there's a lot of wisdom behind it, but it applies especially to our discussion today. You see, people, much like centipedes, surprisingly enough, have all sorts of automatic processes that we rely on. Of those processes, there are some that we can take conscious control of, like walking, or breathing, or blinking. While we can take control of these for specific reasons or situations, they are done best when the body and mind manage them automatically. As you may have guessed, language is another one of these things. Use of your native language can be an entirely automatic process, yet we can take conscious control of it for specific reasons or situations, like trying to be polite, or saying the right thing in an interview, or not dropping the F-bomb in front of your grandmother. Now, learning a new language is certainly different than using your native language, but it doesn't mean you need to overthink it like the centipede and get in your own way. Now that we understand that concept, we're ready for the 3 main points of understanding your target language in the target language. And just to be clear, I mean, if you're learning Spanish, you want to understand it in Spanish, or understanding French in French without, like I said earlier, trying to pull everything back into your native language. Obviously, the main trick and our first point is avoiding constant translation. That way, you can stay in the target language as much as possible. But why exactly is that so important? As we saw with the Centipede's Dilemma, trying to translate everything gets in the way of your amazing brain that can automatically recognize patterns that are well beyond your conscious awareness. If you continuously translate, you will build the habit that as soon as you start reading or hearing something, you're trying to put it back into your native language. I have had so many students tell me that they struggle with this because that's how they were originally taught, and it really builds some unnecessary challenges. The thing is, you don't have to translate something back into your native language just to prove to yourself that you understood it. So if you are trapped in this cycle, it keeps you from experiencing the language authentically, and you're probably missing the next thing that you were supposed to understand. If I'm listening to someone speak in my target language and I hear one sentence, then immediately start trying to translate it in my head word for word, I'm already missing the next thing that person is saying. You can't expect to have conversations like that, nor can you expect your brain to be able to translate things back into your native language while still being able to have implicit and subconscious pattern recognition of the new language. So instead of trying to translate, just take it in. You will understand what you understand, and for the parts that you don't, it's okay. You don't need to understand everything to be learning and progressing. That brings us to our next point, which is using quality input from the beginning. In language learning, quality input starts simple and scales up as you do so that you don't get lost. For example, if you were learning Spanish with me, I'm not going to give you a 200-something page book to start with and expect you to just figure it out or just translate pieces of it at a time to try to read it. If I did, it would be way too hard, it would not be enjoyable, and you'd have to translate large chunks of it to even understand a little. That's not really interacting with the new language. So you need things like beginner materials and structured input to meet you at your current level and lift you up. When you have those kind of materials, there's really no need to be translating everything back because you're building this path as you walk down it. Beginner's materials are things like children's books or videos that are written and created for language learners. Structured input, on the other hand, is input that's simplified and presented in a specific way to help learners process specific parts of the language. For example, if I want my French student to notice and process the rules around changing adjectives to match gender, I'm not going to just read them the grammar rules. I can show them some sentences like il est petit, elle est petite, il est vieux, elle est vieille, maybe along with some images and context as well to help them process it. And that is especially important for beginners. Speaking of which, a great way to get good materials and structured input is with a tutor. If you want to learn or improve your French, Spanish, or English, schedule a session with me using the link in the description. It is very quick and easy. I have 1 hour and 30-minute sessions available, so you can pick what best suits your needs. I can help with whatever you need. Anything from learning a new language from scratch to working on conversational skills, or maybe just helping you prepare for an exam if you're already taking a language class. You can schedule just one session, or you can return and schedule more. There's no long-term commitment. It would be my pleasure to work with you. If you're learning anything other than Spanish, French, or English, though, you will probably have to find a different tutor. Now, before we move on to the last point, the only other thing to be said about quality input is that you will always need it, from the beginning stages of your learning up to advanced proficiency and beyond. Understand that as a language learner, you will kind of never have enough. You'll always need more. But to me, that's good news because that's just more language to enjoy. The last point is to avoid grammar study too early. Why? Similarly to trying to translate everything from the beginning, starting with grammar will set you up to overthink everything. And as we've been talking about, especially with quality input, you've got to shut that little voice off in your head and just take the language in. You don't have to translate, you don't have to dissect it. The thing is that while it may be tempting to look at language as a school subject or as knowledge to acquire, language learning is not just collecting information. Here's a question for you. If you're learning to ride a bike, is it better to have 90% of your practice time spent with someone explaining bike riding to you and only 10% of that time to actually try and practice riding? Or is it better to spend 90% of your practice time actually riding the bike and maybe 10% where somebody can explain small parts of it to help you? Riding a bike takes so much subconscious coordination by your mind and body. So people learn best by simply trying and practicing, allowing their body and mind to learn automatically from the experience. Language is much the same. If we interact with language, communicate in it, and just take it in, those are natural experiences that our minds work with, because language is very much part of human nature. But if we try to consciously think through every little piece of language while we're using it, we end up like the centipede, trying to consciously move and operate every last one of its hundreds of legs. Now, that does not mean you can never directly study grammar or verbs or syntax or whatever, but that type of direct study should always take a back seat to quality input, and your language practice should always focus first on communication and interaction, not analysis or perfection. It makes way more sense to look at details of grammar and other parts of the language after you already have a real base of proficiency. After all, proficiency and explicit grammar knowledge are not the same thing, and look no further than your native language to understand that. Do you think you know all of the grammar rules of your native language? Basically, nobody does. And yet we all know most of the time what is correct because it sounds correct to us, because we know these things, but we know them subconsciously through natural acquisition. So keep your focus there and on communication and interaction. You can't go wrong. That's all for today. I hope that today's concepts allow you to feel more comfortable with understanding your target language in that language without needing to translate it or overthink it. Remember that so much of our learning and understanding happens in processes that we don't want to get in the way of. Don't be like the centipede when you're learning a language, or you might end up getting eaten by a toad. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe for more language videos, and don't forget to schedule your one-on-one lesson with me to practice your French, Spanish, or your English. I'll see you in the next one.